The last time we had a Bible class together, we really were looking at the background to the book of Daniel. So we were sharing together in a study on what really happened. How did the Jews end up in Babylon? And that discussion is on the Open Face YouTube channel. And it's part 1 in this new series. We're going to be going through the book of Daniel. And when we are done, we'll go through the book of Revelation again. This time I want to go through almost verse by verse, point by point. I want to see if we can gather every bit of information we can gather as we go. So I suppose at times it might be a little tedious, maybe even a little boring, because maybe it might seem like some of the information is not really very dynamic and very stirring, but I am persuaded that everything that we see in the books of Daniel and Revelation, they are ordained by our Father because they are intended to have an effect. There's a message in every little bit of these books. And so even though we go through places where it seems like, okay, this is not as exciting, but it's still important information. And so we are planning to go through point by point. And hopefully, all of us will be able to find a blessing as we go through. So we are going to pick up now from Daniel chapter 1. That's where we had started chapter 1, but we got to about the second verse, and then we branched off to look at the background. How did they end up in Babylon? What was going on? How did the Jews end up there? Why was it not the whole nation of Israel? Why was it just the Jews? And we went through all of that in the first presentation. So at this time now, we're going to go to the book of Daniel. We're going to go to chapter 1. And we will I want to read again the first few verses. All right? Beginning in verse 1, it says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God." These 2 verses we read. And we see that Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah, and the king of Judah, Jehoiakim, was taken. And it says that some of the vessels from the house of God, that is from the temple, were carried to the temple of Nebuchadnezzar's God. One of the gods was Bel. I suppose there were several of them. He carried the vessels from the temple of God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Now, the first thing I would like to point out, and I think all of us can recognize this, is that by this time, you could say that the Spirit of God was had been withdrawn from the Jewish nation. Even as Sister Teresa asked us to pray for the people who suffered the flood in Texas, I look at the events that are happening in the world, and you tend to ask the question, why is it that some things happen in some places? And sometimes I think the answer is that the Spirit of God is really being grieved away by the attitude and the behavior of a nation, of a group of people. So in the time of Saul, the Hebrews went to war. The Israelites went to war against the Philistines. And you remember they lost the war, and the Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant and carried it and put it into the house of their god, Dagon. You might remember that story. And it says that in the morning, when the Philistines got up, their god, Dagon, was flat on his face, fell down before the Ark of the Covenant. They put up back Dagon, and the next day, Dagon was flat on his face again, and this time his head was broken off. the next thing that happened was that the Philistines began to break out in hemorrhoids, all the people of the nation, all the men. And they recognized that they had to send the ark back to Israel. And so the point I'm making is that in those days, there was always something supernatural happening to show that God made a distinction between the things that belong to God and the things that were common. But notice what happens here. Nebuchadnezzar attacks Judah, destroys the temple, takes the vessels from the temple and carries them to Babylon and puts them in the house of his God. And there's no reaction from God. There's nothing like what happened when the ark was taken to the temple of Dagon. There's no repercussion for the Babylonians. And it is one indication to me that the Spirit of God had left Israel. God was no longer protecting this nation. And I mean, that is obvious because if you read the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah is the prophet who prophesied at the time of the Babylonian captivity. And over and over in the book of Jeremiah, God told him to surrender to the Babylonians. They were to give in to the Babylonians because he would no longer protect them. And they didn't listen. They kept on rebelling against Nebuchadnezzar, and that is one reason why he eventually destroyed the whole nation. But the point I'm making is that you can see that the Spirit of God is no longer protecting the Jews, no longer protecting the temple. I suppose one of the words we could use to describe the situation was the word Ichabod. The word Ichabod means the glory has departed. It was a name that was given to the child of a woman. I forget exactly who, but when Israel suffered a terrible beating and it was clear that the glory had departed, she named her child Ichabod. It means the glory has departed. And clearly the glory had departed from Judah. God was no longer with them, and so they were taken captives. One question that might be asked is,
But Brother David,
yes,
she
Sister
she
Anita.
she was she was Eli's daughter-in-law.
Thank you for the reminder, Sister.
She was the son of Eli's. She was the wife of Eli's son. One of I think it's Phineas. He died in the war with the Philistine when they took away the ark.
How
When
come
she
you
was when she was giving birth, her child, she proclaimed that word Ichabod, that the glory has departed from Israel.
thank you,
Yeah.
my sister. That is true. I remember here now. How come your voice sounds so different?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe one of the reasons why I see you now, you're in good health and strength. You come back all in all in good hand with your wife. Thank you. Good to see you again.
Good to hear you, Sister Anita. It would be
Okay.
nice if that were the reason, but you sound like there's a booming sound in your background. Do you have a different microphone or something?
I'm telling you, Brother David, from morning until now, there's a carnival right on my street. And I tell you that you cannot get space to go out if you want to. It carved from top to bottom.
Okay, okay,
St. Paul's Carnival. From morning to now, I'm talking to you and I have to have this thing in my ears to hear you. Otherwise, I can't hear you. The
all right.
house is just vibrating.
Okay, okay. I see. I
Thank
understand.
you.
All right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so the question might be asked, where was the Ark of the Covenant? Now, that is the time when the Ark of the Covenant disappeared. And nobody knows exactly what happened to it, but the closest thing the closest data we have is that in the book of Maccabees, it says that Jeremiah took the ark out of the temple and hid it in a cave. So, is that dependable information? The book of the Maccabees, the books of the Maccabees are not in the ordinary King James version that we have. It's in the Catholic Bible. And one of the reasons why the Protestants never put Maccabees and some of the other books in the Protestant Bible is because there are a few teachings that they say do not harmonize with the rest of the Bible. Not so much in the book of Maccabees, but in some of the other books. But they say that during this period when these books were written, there was no prophet in Israel. And so because there was no prophet, they will not accept that. It was not accepted that these books were inspired books. And so even though we use the book of Maccabees as a good historical reference, it's not considered inspired. So whatever we read in the book of Maccabees, we don't give it the same weight that we give to the rest of the Bible. But it does say in the book of Maccabees that Jeremiah took the ark and hid it in a cave somewhere. And that hiding place is not known until today. There's a man named Jonathan Gray. Is it Jonathan Gray? I think Jonathan Gray was the one who carried, but there's a man who claims that he found the real Mount Sinai, the Ark of the Covenant, the Red Sea crossing, Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not Jonathan Gray. His name is at my fingertips. Anybody remember the name of this guy? All right, any of you didn't. But there's this.
Author
Huh?
White. Ron White.
Ron White.
Ron Wyatt. Thank you, Ron Wyatt. Right, Jonathan Gray was the person who was promoting, but Ron Wyatt was an Adventist explorer who he claims, remarkably, he claims to have discovered some of the most iconic scenes, places in the Bible. Sodom and Gomorrah, the real Red Sea crossing, the real Mount Sinai, the Noah's Ark, and he claims to have found the place of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, for me, a lot of his discoveries, I tend to believe they are true. All of you know I'm a little cautious when it comes to what we call conspiracy theories and things like that. I'm cautious, but I'm not blind to evidence. And if you some videos are on YouTube where you can find where it tells you about the real Red Sea crossing, the real Mount Sinai. So the Mount Sinai that is in the books and that you see from time to time as Mount Sinai is actually not the real Mount Sinai. And where you have the Red Sea crossing, Mount Sinai, Sodom and Gomorrah, this man claims to have found all of these places. And it's pretty good evidence. It's convinced me, and I'm a little skeptical about things like this. But one thing I don't believe, and it's kind of funny, because if he's right about 4 things, why would I disbelieve number 5? Because number 5 is fantastic. It has elements in it that I just won't believe. This is the one that sounds like a fairy tale. He says he found the Ark of the Covenant. And let me tell you what he says. He said that angels directed him to where it is. And he said, it's a cave underneath the place where Jesus was crucified. He says the angels took him through a cave, took him through several barriers where nobody could normally go. And he was taken into a place where he saw the Ark of the Covenant. According to him, there were 4 angels standing there guarding it. And they told him he could not take any pictures of it. But he was taken to see it. And he says that above it, there was a crack in the rock. And through the crack, blood came through and fell on the top of the ark, the ark, on the mercy seat. And that blood was the blood of Jesus. From when Jesus was crucified, the blood came through and fell on the mercy seat. And he said the blood was there. He said he got a little bit of the blood, and he took it and got it tested in a certain lab. He either can't give the name of the lab or the lab doesn't exist, but he said they tested the blood and found that it has 23 chromosomes. You know that every human being has 46. He says this blood has 23 chromosomes. That's the story he told. And then he never told anybody where to find this ark. The story is so fanciful. And I'm saying this because there are people who believe it. There are people who believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe that Jesus had 23 chromosomes. I believe he had 46 like you and me. I mean, what that story makes out is that the ark, the blood of Jesus came down through the rock and it fell on the mercy seat. And that was a pretty remarkable sign that would show that the blood is what atones. But then the blood was not normal human blood. It makes Jesus out to be not a normal human being. And the idea that angels just took him there to see this, he couldn't take any pictures, he can't prove anything, but he has this divine inside track where the angels take him and show him this just so he could come and say he saw it. I honestly don't believe it. But anyway, why am I saying this? Because I was just emphasizing that the book of Maccabees says that Jeremiah hid the ark in a cave. And we can assume it is there until today. That's the only thing we know about the ark that I consider credible evidence. It's there until today. Maybe one day it will be found, but until that time, it has been missing. And so when Nebuchadnezzar captured the Jewish nation, took away the vessels, the ark was missing, and it is missing until today. So I just wanted to say that. Now, we can probably hurry through the next part, the next few verses. It says in verse 3, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs. What do we mean that the master of the eunuchs? In the palace of every king in those days, there were certain dedicated servants, and they were almost always there were eunuchs. What does that mean? It means that there were men who were castrated. The kings of that time would not allow men to work in the palace unless they were castrated. They were emasculated. The reason being that every king had several wives, and they could not risk having men in the palace who were capable of impregnating women. So the only man in the palace who worked there, who lived there and worked, who was a complete man, was the king himself. Those who worked there, they were eunuchs. So it seemed like a good job working in the palace, but it came with a very high cost. A cost that, I mean, no rational man would want to submit to. So the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, and he told him to bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes. This demonstrates that although Nebuchadnezzar was let me say he was a cruel person, maybe, according to the standards of that day, maybe not so much, but according to the standards of today, he was a hard and cruel person. But he was wise, because he didn't just destroy the Jews and subjugate them, make them into slaves. No, he asked that certain of the young men from the nation, he specified the king's seed and the princes, I suppose generally with the thought that these are the more talented, the more educated, the ones with greater potential. He asked the eunuch to select certain of the young people from among the Jews. And he specified in verse 4, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, well built, good looking, I suppose, physically, and their features, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And we can see clearly Nebuchadnezzar was a wise person. What he wants is people to work in his kingdom who might contribute to the benefit of the kingdom. So he asked them to select certain of these young men who were talented, who were gifted, who were already educated, and now he's going to educate them in the language of Babylon and in the sciences of Babylon, And these young men are going to become, those who qualify will become a part of his advisors, I suppose. It says in verse 5, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat. They were to eat the best, what the king considered the best food. And I suppose it's interesting because if all of us today were to be put in the hands of worldly kings, our leaders, and they were told, and we were told to be given the best food, it would be interesting to see what we would be given. You know, almost certainly, I mean, while I was in Europe, and as I've been to different places, sometimes we stay at a hotel, and I'm going to tell you, almost guaranteed, when you go to breakfast, one of the main items on the menu will be ham. One of the things that you are certain to get, no matter what is missing, you're going to get some pork. Because, you know, it's considered good, uplifting, beneficial food in the thinking of the world. And so Daniel and his friends, are these young men, were being told that they would be getting the king's meat, but this was no guarantee that it was good food. So they were to get daily a provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. So what this means simply is that they were to do a 3-year course, okay? During those 3 years, they were to be given all the benefits that the kingdom of Babylon could provide. They were to eat as well as the king himself. And they were to be educated with the best education of Babylon. And at the end of that time, it says they were to stand before the king, meaning that the king himself would examine them. Very clearly, the king was an educated person. He had a good understanding of certain things. And he would examine them after 3 years and find out how much their education had done for them. So it was a good plan. As the world goes, it was a good plan. And the king was seeking to, probably not to benefit them, but to benefit his kingdom, but still it would be good for them. It says, now among these were the children of Judah. Of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These were their Hebrew names. And I'm not aware of the meaning of all the names, but Daniel, for example, means God is my judge. Mishael means one who is like God. Who is like God? Hananiah, I'm not sure. Azariah, I'm not sure. But it's interesting that these names were focusing on the God of Israel. Even though El is kind of like a general name, but there were names that alluded to the relationship of these young men to their God. And so it says in verse 7, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. Now what he did was what they popularly did in those days. When one nation conquered another nation, this is a relevant piece of information. It was a given that the fact that your nation was conquered by my nation, the most meaningful data you could gain from that is that my God is more powerful than your God. This is one of the reasons why this was not just a dishonor to the Jewish nation, it was a dishonor to the God of Israel. The fact that they had been defeated. They drove away the Spirit of God. God left them to their own devices, and so they were defeated. And it was a smear on the name and the character of God. So one of the things they would do, which you see here, is that they would name the people that came under their influence. They would change their names. You know, it's usually something that happens when people are defeated. It's interesting that even today you see some relics of this. My name is Clayton. And I happen to know that Clayton is an English name. I don't know how I came by it, okay? I don't know that I have any English ancestors. I have Chinese and Indian on one side, and I have black on the other side. And the blacks came from Africa. So I don't know how the name Clayton came. But I know a lot of the time what happened was that slaves gained the name or were given the names of the slave masters. So we have a lot of English names all over Jamaica. Johnson, Baker, Blackwood, all kinds of names. And so it's kind of a little, and kind of like in rebellion, I know that there are some people who have gone and changed their names and they give themselves African names. But it's a reflection of what used to happen right throughout history. And so the Babylonians gave these young men Babylonian names, names that related to their gods. So it tells you that Daniel was given the name Belteshazzar. Bel was a Babylonian god. As a matter of fact, in the apocryphal books, there's a book that is called Bel and the Dragon. I never read it. I took a glance at it some time ago, but Bel and the Dragon, and it's talking about the time in Babylon and the god Bel, the Babylonian god. So Daniel was given a name relating to the god Bel. Hananiah was given a name relating to Shadrach. It also related to every one of the names. Meshach, Abednego, Nego was one of the gods. So anyway, these names were intended to honor the Babylonian gods rather than the God of the Jews, because obviously in their thinking, the God of the Jews was weaker because he had not been able to preserve them when the Babylonians came against them. I don't know if you remember when the Rabshakeh came up against Israel, the 10 tribes, in the days of, no, it wasn't the 10 tribes, it was against the same Judah. The king of Assyria came against Judah. And when the Rabshakeh came to make his announcement, he says, don't let Hezekiah fool you to say that Yahweh will save you. The gods of Egypt could not save them. The gods of Sepharvaim, and he mentions the names and he says, these gods were not able to deliver them. So don't let Hezekiah fool you to think that your God can save you. So that is the way they looked at life. If we defeat you, it means that your God is weaker than our God. And so, of course, Nebuchadnezzar is giving them the names of his God. Now, verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart, Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. This is an interesting thing, and I'm just going to comment on it a little bit. My mind is still in a little bit of a daze. I find my tongue wanting to mix up itself. So, there are two perspectives on what this was about. The first one is that Daniel knew that the food was unhealthy, and so he refused to eat the food because it was unhealthy. And so Daniel was vegetarian, and Daniel was promoting a vegetarian diet because he knew this was the best kind of diet. This is the position that is mostly promoted by the Adventist Church, and mostly something that I myself embraced for many years. The second perspective is that this was really because the food that they were being offered was food that had been offered to pagan gods. It had been dedicated to pagan gods, and so to partake of food offered to idols was in a way endorsing the idol, and Daniel wanted to avoid doing that. So we will look a little more closely at the passage to see what makes sense. It is a little difficult to make a firm decision based on the text, okay? So we're going to look at it, and then maybe we might get some better ideas. Now, was it because when he says he might not defile himself, was he talking about physical defilement? Like the food itself was unclean food, and the food itself was not the best kind of food? Or was it spiritual defilement, meaning it was food offered to idols? All right. So Daniel decided that he's not going to eat this food. And let's read a little further. It says, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. I still have to comment on that. I am of the firm belief that when a Christian goes anywhere and he meets upon good people, he will be loved. Okay? I'm of that firm belief. I don't believe that Christians will meet upon good people and they will be hated. I remember when Joseph went into prison, he was brought into favor with the guard almost immediately. And I find Daniel here, he's in Babylon, he's a prisoner, and almost immediately the man who is put in charge of them loves Daniel. I believe this is the way it is with a Christian. You go to work in a place and they learn to love you. You move among people, wherever you go. If you're a child of God and you behave like a child of God, you will be loved and appreciated. Granted, there will be somebody who doesn't like you. There will always be somebody, or there will often be somebody that Satan plants there who sets out to make trouble. But by and large, I believe if you're a Christian, people will appreciate your Christianity. They will appreciate your humility, your generosity. You're willing to take the back seat. You are not afraid of taking the lowest job. You're not afraid of doing the things that other people don't want to do. Your humility and your gentleness will impress people. I'm just putting in that plug because I don't believe that Christians are put in this world to defend themselves and to make sure that people don't mistreat you and walk on you. I know that in the world, that is how it is. You defend yourself, okay? You defend your cause. You're black, so you defend the black issues. You're a woman, so you defend the feminist issues. You are Republican or Democrat, you defend those issues. But the point is, you're making sure nobody takes advantage of you, even though you might be a minority. Christianity, I don't believe it is like this. I believe we Christians know who runs our lives. We know who is in charge. And so, this is why it is easy as a Christian to be humble, to take the lowest seat. Because you know you are not defined by the job. If it needs somebody to clean the toilets, or to wipe the floor, or to do something, you don't have an issue. I remember one time we were on a bus. We were going out on a trip when I used to be a part of the church. We were going on a trip, maybe to the seaside or something. But the church was on this trip. And there was one brother with us who was a friend of mine from college, but he was not a part of this particular church, but he was my friend, so he was coming along on the trip. And shortly after we started out, a child vomited on the bus. There was vomit all over the floor. And if the truth be told, the instinct of everybody, I can't remember my feelings, but I think if I am typical, I also want it to get far away. I don't want any of it splash on me. I want to make sure that this vomiting child stops and that there's no more. And before I could blink, this brother jumped to his feet and he I don't know where he got paper or cloth or whatever it was, and he was wiping up the vomit. The stranger on the bus, the one person who of all people should have nothing to do with this vomit. He jumped up and he was wiping it up before anybody could even think about what was going on. I've known this brother for many, many years. And actually, we have had disagreements on some doctrinal issues, but I always remember that is always his attitude. Sometimes he comes to stay at my home, and my wife is always glad when he comes, because you know what? When he's here, she doesn't have to wash the dishes. When he's here, he will look for some way to wipe the house or do something. He's always taking the job that nobody else wants to do. And as a Christian, I don't have a lot of admiration for his theological understanding. Theologically, he has taken some positions that have distressed me, but as a Christian brother, his attitude has impressed me greatly. That is why even when we disagree, my heart is still with him. So I'm kind of talking about Daniel, but I think this is how Christians, this is how God's children behave. And so Daniel, as a captive in Babylon, was immediately in the favor of the prince of the eunuchs. And the point I'm making is, anywhere you see this kind of attitude, sometimes we think, sometimes Satan deceives us into thinking that because we are the children of God, we should have the best. We are not the ones who are to take the lowest place. That's nonsense and rubbish. The greatest among us is a servant. The most admirable person is the person who takes the lowest position. The greatest is the person who can say, I was wrong, I'm sorry. These are the things that endear us to people, that make us love and appreciate people. And I'm just segueing a little bit from Daniel's situation to make the point that it is still that way today. So Daniel was loved because I believe he was that kind of person. So Daniel feels free to go to this man and tell him what's going on. So the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king. I'm afraid of the king, who has appointed your meat and your drink. The king himself says what you are to eat. For why should he see your faces worse liking or worse looking than the children which are of your sort? What he's saying, the man is saying, there are other people from your nation, children which are of your sort. There are other Jews who are from your nation, and there are other people who are your age. And when he sees that your face looks worse than those, he's going to observe that you look worse. Then you'll make me endanger my head to the king. This was no idle statement by this man, because look here, one of the things that we find about Nebuchadnezzar, he was not shy or reluctant about chopping people in pieces and turning their houses into a dunghill. That was his favorite way of punishing people. You'll see a couple of times when he's threatening, he makes a decision to chop up people and to turn their houses into dunghill. And on 2 occasions, Daniel had to step in and save them. But in those days, if you think, let me be a little facetious, if you think Trump or Putin or these people have power, you should have lived in the days of Nebuchadnezzar. So the eunuch is really justifiably afraid. And if you notice, he has a misconception. His misconception is that if you stop eating this food that he thinks is a good food, clearly he was badly educated. But if you stop eating it, you are going to look worse than the others. In verse 11, then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel. So Daniel moves from the prince of the eunuchs, and he goes now to the man who is cooking the food, or the man who is delivering the food, somebody named Melzar. Well, according to the NASB, Melzar means the overseer. It's not a name, it's a title. So Daniel said to the overseer, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Look at what he says. He says, prove your servants, I beseech you, 10 days. Put us to the test for 10 days. Let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Now, this is where you come upon a difficulty. I don't know if 10 days could make such a difference. what this
I
seems.
lost volume.
What's that, brother? Keep.
Wasn't hearing you for a minute.
Okay. What I was saying is, this is where it's a little strange to me. I don't know if 10 days, if you eat rich food and I eat the kind of diet that Daniel asked for, pulse to eat, vegetarian food, and water to drink, and we go at it for 10 days, will you look so much better than me in 10 days that there's a marked difference? This is where I'm challenged, because 10 days it's not even 2 weeks. And I see people who eat flesh and a rich diet, and I see people who are vegetarians, and if you look at them in 10 days, you can't really see the difference. So I'm going to suggest, and I see your hand, Sister Talia, I'm going to suggest that what Daniel was expecting was a miracle. Daniel was expecting a miracle. He was expecting God to do something to vindicate his faithfulness. And we're going to talk about why Daniel did it this way, but I think it was a miracle. Yeah, Sister Talia, you can go ahead, and then Brother Ray.
Thank you, brother. Welcome back. I love you. I missed you. I'm sorry I wasn't here because I'm traveling right now. But you know what? You answered my question before I even asked, because yes, he wanted to God. I believe Daniel wanted God to, and he might have. Let me digress for a minute. And he might have looked more beautiful in appearance because he asked God, But I agree with what you said. Thank you.
Okay, Sister Talia. And I love you too and missed you too, so I'm glad it was mutual. Brother Ray, go ahead.
Yes, maybe it could have been that being that these men were just picked out at that moment, they were underweighted because they have gotten taken over and they were not eating good. So maybe they were lightweighted, and in 10 days, you could gain pounds, you could gain weight, and that could make a difference.
Okay, Brother Ray. Yeah, thank you for the suggestion. I mean, it's a little strange because everybody is going to be eating, including the other people who have been taken captives, okay? So what Daniel is betting on is that in 10 days, well, I suppose what is banking on is that he's not going to look any worse. Let me put it that way then. I suppose that is what Israel is saying. And I think I can see that logically that makes sense, because if one of us eats the normal, let's say the normal American diet, the normal fast food diet, and one of us eats a more healthy, carefully planned diet, eventually there's going to be a significant difference. But 10 days is a very short time. So all of us start at zero, and you are eating this diet and I'm eating this diet. 10 days is really a very short time. But I really believe that there was a divine input. But why? We're going to look at in just a moment. So Daniel specifically asked for a vegetarian diet. And if you're a vegetarian, of course, you make the point that this demonstrates that a vegetarian diet is more healthy. But and that Daniel was a total vegetarian. The reason why this is strange is because vegetarianism was not taught in Israel. Vegetarianism was not taught in Israel. God gave them a diet that consisted of clean foods and rejected unclean foods. It's very clearly, specifically laid out there in Leviticus 11. God did not give to anybody apart from maybe some people who took a vow, specifically took a vow, special people. But God never gave Israel the mandate to be vegetarian. So it's strange that Daniel adopted this diet, and it makes it seem like maybe the other reason is the real reason. Now, the other reason is that the king's food was always offered to idols. Now, early on, I didn't believe this. But at this point, I lean in that direction for this reason, that later in life, Daniel is clearly a meat eater. He's a flesh eater. When you come to chapter 9, you see that Daniel is a flesh eater. So it's strange that later in life he should be a flesh eater when he would not be a flesh eater here. So it makes me think that maybe vegetarianism wasn't the issue. But Daniel asked for this food because vegetarian food would not be offered to the gods. Flesh food, yes, would be offered to the god, but not vegetarian food. All right, so I saw Sister Destiny's hand up. I saw Brother, I don't know if Brother Ray put up back his hand or it's the same from before.
My comment was on what you just said, because in Daniel 10, I think 2 to 3, it mentions where he's going on like he's mourning, and so he's no longer eating the meat and the wine. So to me, that just indicated that he did have a meat eating diet later on in life.
Yes, thank you, Sister Destiny. That's what I was mentioning. All right, so I assume your hand is up from before, Brother Ray. Or are you up again? All right, let me take it down. Okay, Daniel is confident. He's confident about his 10 days. He says, then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So I think as you even look at this verse, the issue is the king's meat. It's not so much that it's a flesh diet. I mean, up here, it seems to suggest that flesh is an issue because it says, give us pulse to eat. And the pulse, if you look at the translation here in the NASB, it says vegetables to eat. So he did ask for a vegetarian diet, and he asked for water to drink instead of the wine and the flesh food that was surely heavy on the king's list. But the reason why he asked for this, it seems to me, is not because he was thinking, it's not because he was a strict vegetarian. That was not the issue, because later on, as Sister Destiny pointed out, he wasn't a strict vegetarian. It was more likely because of the food being offered to idols. Brother Tony, go ahead.
No, that's you keep answering everything I'm gonna say.
Okay. All right, brother.
Yeah, I think that was it because, like, I was gonna say he was a meat eater, but I think he was eating clean meats, and the king's meat was offered to idols and pork and everything else. So that's the reason why they wouldn't, prohibit themselves to eat that foolishness.
I think so, Brother Tony. The safest thing was to ask for a vegetarian diet.
Right.
But Brother Joshua, go ahead.
Yeah. Welcome back, Brother David. You're looking good, man.
Thank you, Brother
Hope you had a
Joshua.
good time. You were able I'm sure the Lord was with you as you were in the vineyard. You know, sometimes you're so overconfident when you're a kid. You're fighting another kid. I remember back in the days, and you said, tie one hand behind my back and I'm going to show you I can still beat you with one hand. I think Daniel was not really a vegetarian, but he was the word prove thy servants, I beseech thee. Maybe he was saying to himself and to the guy, I'm gonna take the worst food you could offer me. You're gonna prove my God. I'm gonna prove my God, and you're gonna prove my God is gonna come through for me. He was so confident. So I'm gonna go with that confidence. It's sometimes we gotta like the other day I was searching for something. I went out by faith. I was in a terrible jam, and there was no information forthcoming. There was nothing going on. I had nowhere to turn, and I just went out on a limb and listening to a voice. And at the end of the day, you know, all was well. So I think Daniel was proving his God by taking the worst kind of food he could find and allowing God to work through him to show him, show his friends, show everybody that what we're on the right track. Yeah, but you're looking good, brother David. Keep it up, man. Looking good.
All right, Brother Joshua, praise the Lord for this and everything else. I'm glad to know. Yeah, our Father is good, and I'm glad it shows. All right, so this is the thing. Daniel has a confidence. He says, if you give us vegetable material to eat, then let our faces be looked upon before you, and the faces of the children that eat the portion of the king's meat. And as you see, deal with your servant. So Daniel is so convicted. I mean, is he saying that I know a vegetarian diet will make me look better after 10 days? Or is he saying, I know that if I stand for God, God will make me look better? I think it's number two, right? Because when you look at what happened, it says that he agreed to them, he consented to them in this matter, and he proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer. And the word fairer is an old word. It just means they appeared more healthy and fatter in flesh. And that word fatter, again, it's kind of like using the old concept, because I don't think if you look fat, if you look very fat, it's necessarily a sign of health. But it says fatter and fairer. In 10 days, you see a significant difference that you can notice than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. So God has made them look more healthy, more robust, more alert. Everything about them looks like people who are eating better food. And I say that if this happens to one of them, it's kind of interesting. If it happens to two, it's a strange coincidence. If it happens to four, it has to be the work of God. So these four who ask for this special diet, God is respecting their faith. I think it's more a testament to their faith than a testament to the efficacy of vegetables. All right. Now I'm not knocking vegetables, because I'm still, for to a large extent, I'm still vegetarian. Not total vegan, no, but I am still preferring that kind of diet. So I'm not knocking it, but I'm saying that if we interpret this to be a testimony to say we should all become vegetarians and eat vegetables and eat nothing else, I think we would be misunderstanding the passage. Okay, I think we'd misunderstand the passage, because this is not the point, because there's nowhere in the Bible where God gives that kind of instruction. What is happening here is the faith of Daniel and his friends is being vindicated, because they are standing for the principle, and I believe it's a principle that we won't eat food that is offered to idols. I think that is the point. It says in verse 16, thus the overseer took away the portion of their meat, stopped giving them the king's food and the wine that they should drink, and gave them vegetables. And the fact that a miracle is involved is brought out in verse 17, because it says, as for these 4 children, young men, youths, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. So there you have it. There you have it. God gave them knowledge, God gave them skill, and I suppose humanly somebody would say, well, it was because of their diet why they developed this knowledge and this skill. But the Bible gives the credit right where it is due. God was involved, and it's their faithfulness that allows God to work in their lives. It's their faithfulness more than their diet. I'm going to tell you, and I see your hand, Brother Ian. I live in Jamaica, and the Jamaicans will know that the most vegetarian people in Jamaica are not Adventists, they are Rastafarians, they are Rastas. They are extremists, I would say. Some of them don't even cook food. I've known some Rastas, they put their food in the sun and eat it, right? They don't cook. They don't use salt, many of them. And Of course, some of them do, but you know, they're a mixed group. They don't have any consistent doctrine. But generally, the people who are the greatest promoters of what they call ital food is Rastafarians. And I will tell you, they definitely are not wiser than the rest of the population. They definitely are not wiser than the Christians who might eat flesh or so on. They definitely are not wiser. Okay? They worship a dead man. They worship the dead king of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, and they say that he's God. They smoke marijuana and they do all kinds of foolish things. So, anyway, that is just by the way. Go ahead, Brother Ian. Ian? Brother Ian, you probably need to go and check your mic. If you can hear me, you're not being heard.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, you're up now.
Okay. I'm saying that, was it just the fact that the food was offered to idol, or was there more to it? Because how do we know that the pulse that they were getting were not offered to idols? I mean, the vegetables. Did they just offer meats to idols, or did they offer all their foods to idols? Couldn't it be that the meats, the kind of meats they were eating, were unclean meats?
Yeah, it could be that as well. But I think customarily, I could be wrong about this, and it's something we could look at. I don't think they would offer vegetables to their idols. But I could be wrong. It's something we could look at. But I mean, he refused the wine, and later on in Daniel 10, you will see that Daniel drinks wine. But he refused the wine, and he refused the king's food right across the board. I mean, he could have said, okay, just give me this kind of flesh, this kind of food. But there's something apparently that is going on why he says, I don't want any flesh food. I want vegetarian food. I want vegetables. So clearly, the distinction is the kind of food. So either there is a difference because vegetables were not offered to the gods of Babylon, or it's because the vegetarian diet is so healthy. But that creates a problem because it doesn't explain why later in life he's using flesh and he's using wine. So just some things to think about. So I tend to think that it's because the king's food, it's because flesh food was offered to idols and probably vegetarian food wasn't offered to idols. As a matter of fact, I don't know if anybody had a vegetarian diet because he's asking for something unusual. You know, in what is considered a healthy diet, mostly in those kinds of places. Today, you will have a mix of vegetables, but I think historically, a high meat content diet was considered the norm. You eat a big steak, and that is it. You hardly have any, and you drink down the wine. You hardly have any vegetarian matter there to go with it. So, generally speaking, that's what I think it was like in the popular diet of the day. It's something we can look at more closely. I'm just speaking a little bit here from what I know, or what the perspective I have, which we could look at it more closely. Now, it says specifically that Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And so what this tells me is that from those days, God had given Daniel this gift. So somehow his friends developed that understanding. Somehow Daniel himself had come into situations which made him know that God had given him this understanding. He knew that he had this gift. So even before the days of spiritual gifts, Daniel knew that he not only, well, I'm not sure if he knew that he was a prophet yet, but he knew that whenever somebody had a dream, a supernatural dream, God would give him understanding. And that is why he was so bold in chapter 2 when it came to Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He was bold enough to say, give me some time. So even during those years, God was rewarding his faithfulness. While he was in school for those 3 years, God rewarded his faithfulness. He rewarded the faithfulness of the other 3, and he gave them special skill and wisdom. So it says in verse 18, Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them. In other words, the king examined them. He gave them a verbal test. And among them all was none found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So their faithfulness was rewarded. God gave them, I suppose God helped them to have a good memory to remember the things they learned. But we know that true education is not how much you can memorize. True education is how you can apply what you have learned. Okay? This is something that even today people are beginning to understand. Most people who go to, we are fond of criticizing the medical profession, and rightly so, because we say they learn to prescribe. I'm generalizing. If there's any doctor or nurse in the room, don't take offense. I'm generalizing. But generally, the things they learn in theological school, medical school, and most of the sciences, what they teach you to do is to regurgitate data. They put data into your head and you regurgitate it. You're not supposed to think and analyze and to reshape that information. When you begin to do this, you become dangerous. And really, this is how you have new ideas. This is how you have new discoveries, because you have people who are brave enough, innovative enough, and open-minded enough to begin to take their information and reconfigure that information and learn something else. So the king examined these three young men and discovered that they had that kind of education. They were wise. It says, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding, see, not just information, but understanding, that the king inquired of them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the astrologers that were in all his realm. I don't know how he measured 10 times, right? I don't know if he gave them a test and that was based on a standard mark. But anyway, all the magicians, and these were people who came from different lands, plus the Babylonians, all the astrologers, the people who studied the stars and were involved in those kinds of sciences. Then the king found Daniel and his three friends 10 times better. Now, the best I can say to this is that God rewards faithfulness. I mean, there is a verse that says, he that is faithful in that which is least, Jesus says it. He that is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. And this was an illustration of it here. Daniel was faithful in a little thing. When it came to not eating food offered to idols, if that was the issue, he proved to be faithful. He made up his mind. Even though he was a prisoner in a strange land where he could lose his head at the snap of the king's finger, he decided he was going to be loyal to his God. And if we stand for God, Jesus said, the one who honors me before men, I will honor before my Father which is in heaven. Daniel and his friends honored the God of heaven. And though it was not a part of God's plan to set them free to go where? To go back to a devastated country. There was no future or life back in Judah. Everything was gone. Their life from that moment was in Babylon. But then God started to open the way and pave the way for them to have the best possible kind of life that they could have as the children of Jehovah, even in Babylon. And this was the beginning. God gave them this great wisdom, this great insight and ability that made them 10 times better. And this opened the way for the future of Daniel and those three boys. So it says in verse 21, and Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. So it's telling you that this book was written after the fact, this chapter, or this part of the chapter, and it tells you that Daniel continued right through the time of Nebuchadnezzar, his father, Nebuchadnezzar, his grandson, Belshazzar, through the Persians, King Medo-Persia, Darius and Cyrus, and Artaxerxes, Well, no, it continued until the year of Cyrus. So he continued through the time of Darius until the time of King Cyrus. That was the year when Daniel went to sleep. So he lived through the reign of several kings, and all along the way, the name of Daniel was famous. If you even look in the book of Ezekiel, even in the lifetime of Daniel, his name was known, outstanding. God says through Ezekiel, even though Noah and Daniel and Job were living in the land, they would only deliver themselves by their own righteousness. They could not deliver anybody else. But God put Daniel in the category of Job and Noah. So even in his lifetime, Daniel became very famous as an outstanding servant of God, not after he died, but during his lifetime. So this brings us to the end of Daniel chapter 1, and it sets the stage for what is to come afterwards. This is why Daniel became the outstanding person that he was. This is why God was able to use him in such a way, because he started out by being faithful to God, and that faithfulness continued throughout his lifetime. And I want to say that the same principle holds true. No matter who we are or where we are, those who are faithful to God, God will reward that faithfulness.